And welcome back to Inside Olympia. Nuclear energy and consumer data privacy, two topics that don't have a lot in common, but they are top priorities for my next two guests, who serve as the Democratic Vice Chair and Ranking Republican on the House Technology, Economic Development, and Veterans Committee. Joining me now is Democratic State Representative Shelley Kloba and Republican State Representative Stephanie Barnard. Welcome, both of you, to Inside Olympia. Good to talk to you.
Thanks for having us.
These might be two issues that are like oil and water, but we're gonna navigate them because they're both interesting and timely. I do want to start with you, Representative Kloba, and talking about comprehensive data privacy, and to sort of set the stage for the conversation. Very interestingly, Washington State had a bill a few years back called the Washington Privacy Act that became the inspiration for, maybe even the template for, data privacy laws that passed in a bunch of states. Right. And yet it never passed here. Mm-hmm. Now 19 states have comprehensive data privacy laws, and Washington doesn't. We do have the My Health, My Data Act, which we'll talk about. But you are back with a proposal to try to make Washington the 20th state. Let's just talk big picture, though, about the fact that we started this, but we haven't finished. Why don't we have a law yet?
Well, it is, I'm a veteran of those wars, yes, that we had, and I think it was notable to me when the very first time the Washington Privacy Act debuted that it didn't have enough consumer advocacy behind it. And in fact, the first hearing didn't have anybody from that space. And by the time it came over to the House, it did. So they had joined in, and there was a lot of criticism because it was not very consumer friendly. There were a lot of big loopholes. It did not have a private right of action so that people who were harmed could seek a remedy. And so I feel like it was least common denominator. You know, sometimes in other states, I think they did what they could pass. And I think, you know, here in Washington, we want to make sure that consumers are really at the center of a bill like that. And I'm hoping that this one is it. So it does advance beyond what has been in the Washington Privacy Act and its followers, the trailers, the model, you know, it served as a model for.
Do you think the dynamics have changed? Obviously, you have a lot of other states now to build off of, right. But have the politics in the legislature, has something shifted that makes you think that this might be more possible this year?
Well, this is definitely a session that I feel like I think of it as shifting sands is sort of the theme for me for this. And so between a bunch of, you know, a new governor who, when he was the Attorney General, was very supportive of the bill and a private right of action, and we also have new leaders in the Senate, lots of brand new members in the House, a lot of House members who have really been on the House side of things where they heard the real emphasis on consumers. Mm-hmm. They're now over in the Senate. Right. So it's almost like somebody just kind of tossed all the dice in, shook it all up, and now we've got a whole new ball game.
And not really sure where everything will land. And right. I should note that when we talk about consumer data privacy, what we're talking about is the fact that we all get to surf the internet and use social media sites for no cost except the price of our internet connection. But in exchange, there are companies hoovering up our data and monetizing that and selling it. And so these laws, and we'll talk in a minute a little bit about how they set about to try to protect people a little bit more from having the idea being allow consumers to have some additional say over how their data is being used and monetized. Okay, let's put a pin in data privacy, and let's bring in our other topic du jour here, which is nuclear power, and the fact that you represent the Tri-Cities area, obviously home to Hanford. We are a state thinking about our energy future because people are going electric. So where are we going to get the extra energy from? And we're also trying to move towards a clean energy future. So you're an evangelist for nuclear. But why? Because aren't we cleaning up after decades of making a huge mess in your neck of the woods over nuclear? Why would we want to do that again?
Oh, gosh, it is such a mess. But I think that, you know, and we are cleaning it up, and I think we're doing a great job of it. So I think the problem is, Austin, is that there is such a conflation between the two types of waste. One is this Hanford, Manhattan era project, Department of Defense waste, and then you have spent fuel. which is part of the Columbia Generating Station, which is producing nuclear fuel, and producing nuclear energy, and we're using it in our state as baseload energy now. But the spent fuel from the Columbia Generating Station is being held on site in dry casks. So it's not the same type of waste. And I think a lot of the confusion comes from that. People remember The Simpsons and they think of the green goo and all of the bubbly things coming out of these tanks or these barrels. And it's just, that is more analogous to the Hanford legacy waste from the Manhattan Project. It is not what's happening at Columbia Generating. So I think because the Columbia Generating Station is located on the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, it's natural to conflate the two, and I think that is just such a misnomer. And so it's easy to make that error.
You're not the only one who thinks that nuclear has a future here. I mean, Bill Gates is pursuing this as well. So what is the pitch? How do you think nuclear helps us into the future, and what percentage of our portfolio do you think it should or would be?
Well, right now I think it's over 7% of what the state resource is for our energy, and we definitely need more. What we need right now is baseload energy, not the kind that is weather dependent. It's dispatchable, it's clean. We're trying to make it more affordable by going through the small modular reactor type of project rather than a large like Vogtle or something similar to that. But we want that to be added to our baseload so that we can have this dependable, clean, affordable product that could provide for the entire state. So I don't know eventually what it could get to, but we need all types of energy. I'm not an evangelist just for nuclear, but I think it's part of the transition. I think it's part of our growth.
I know the former governor Inslee said he was supportive of.
He was. And he said it openly a couple of times.
So what is your sense, though, of as a Republican, not in the majority in the legislature, what is the openness? It looks like you have 4 bills in this topic area. 1 has gotten a hearing so far. What is your sense of the appetite on the part of the majority party? I'm pointing to Representative Kloba, but it's not your committee. So, but
I think I'm also the founder and one of the 4 co-chairs of the Legislative Nuclear Energy Caucus, and we've had over 40 legislators attending those, just depending on what the topic is. Mm-hmm. And we also have a meeting tomorrow. A lot of people are really interested about projects. They want to learn about nuclear, so there is this engagement that we've been getting. We also have a lot of support that maybe not on paper, a lot of vocal support for nuclear, a lot of across the aisle collaboration on projects. And it's actually 2 bills that I've had heard, and one that's being the targeted urban area bill that is allowing for 2 property tax exemptions to be extended to 2 24-month periods for any big projects that have to be cited through the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So that is actually a bill that's going. Okay. It's moving. So super excited about that.
Okay. We're going to, like a game of table tennis here, pop back to data privacy. And here's what I want to ask you, Representative Kloba, about this bill is you mentioned the private right of action, which is frankly controversial and not an element in, I think, any of the laws that are in statute now. And it's also the thing that high-centered the Washington Privacy Act back in the day. So you've got that in there. The other piece, and we'll come back to that one, but I want to ask you about something else that's sort of become controversial and a source of maybe evolution as these laws have passed, and that is the language around data minimization, the language that tells these companies what they can collect about us when we start to engage with their sites. And the standard has been basically collect what you need to give me the service that I'm asking for, and you can pretty much do whatever else you want if you put it in your privacy guidelines that you disclose to me. Maryland this past year passed a data minimization standard that's much stricter. It says, really, you can only take from me what you need to do to provide the service I am requesting. So where did you land with data minimization? And then we'll talk about the private right of action.
Okay, so with data minimization, like you said.
And the reason why it's so nerdy, but it's so important, because it's how this thing's going to work.
Right. And if we go back a year or two, opt-out versus opt-in has been something that's very challenging. So do companies just take whatever they want of your data and do whatever they want with it, and you as a consumer have to read through these really long, dense privacy policies to then exercise your right and go, no, I need to opt out of that? Or do we, on the other side of that, do opt-in, where they can't collect anything unless your affirmative consent is there? Data minimization tries to hit in the middle there because it says, just like we're used to in the old, pre-computer days, that the company is going to harvest, that's not the right word, is going to collect the data that they need to offer you the good or service. So I want address, I want this size, I want this color, and ship it to here, and here's my credit card information. Those things are the kinds of things people, of course, expect. It's very transparent. We know that data is coming. But when they collect all this other data, it's not transparent to us. And so this bill says it minimizes the amount of data you can collect, and then it also gives people the opportunity to opt out of the sale of their data, the use of their data for targeted advertising, and the use of their data to make a profile that is used for automated decision making. So it kind of splits the difference between that.
Which starts to get us into AI.
Well, yes.
Yeah. And so that is interesting, because that also, I think, for a lot of people starts to become familiar, because we've started to see these pop-ups when we go to websites that allow you to sort of toggle and make some decisions before you proceed. Okay, the private right of action, I want to hear you make the case for it. I know Representative Barnard is going to have a case against it.
Sure.
Companies will say, look, you're going to open us up to a bunch of litigation that is going to kind of bury us. It's going to cost us a lot of money, and it's an anti-business poison pill in a bill. What's your response? And then on the flip side, there's consumer advocates who say if it's not in there, the Attorney General's office will not have the capacity to enforce this, and it's sort of toothless.
Right. So I think it's important to remember that every privacy policy or law that exists at the federal level, so HIPAA is one that people are very familiar with.
Healthcare privacy.
Right, healthcare privacy. There's FERPA, which does educational privacy for students. There's Fair Credit Reporting Act, et cetera. They all require you, regardless of the size of the business or how much business you do, require you, if you collect certain types of data, here are the things you are required to do, right? That's one precedent, federal precedent around for years. And the other one is that they all have a private right of action. And this is based on the long-standing principle that our justice system has, that there is no right without remedy. So Washingtonians, for decades, more than that, many decades, have had the protection of the Consumer Protection Act. And that act has two pieces. These are two tools that are available to every Washingtonian for anything that violates the Consumer Protection Act. And that is the Attorney General can take action, or you can take action on your own. And so to remove that from what Washingtonians are used to and Americans are used to with other privacy policies that are at the federal level, it just has, I've never heard an argument to me that made me want to give that up.
My sense is part of why we don't have a data privacy laws, because this has been the thing that has hung up this legislature for so many years.
Right.
But Representative Barnard, what is your thought on this bill generally and specifically on the private right of action?
Well, I mean, I'm pro-business, and I cannot support the private right of action, respectfully. I feel like the scope of this bill is so enormous that what we're looking at here is just opening the floodgates to line the pockets of lawyers. And hey, two of my kids are lawyers, so I'm not, I'm not anti-lawyer. I just think, how can, I don't even know, according to some of the definitions in the bill, how you would go about doing this. So this private right of action, would it, if say you were doing business from Montana to Washington, maybe there was some inferred information from your data that allowed them to market to you. Say you were wanting to buy a dress from Nordstrom or wherever, and Montana got a hold of that information, and they started marketing to you dresses that were similar or something like that. But that's inferred information that would be prohibited under this bill. Would then they be liable, and could we then have a consumer like yourself instigate a private right of action? And I just think, do we even know that? Does this bill have those definitions, or is it clearly defined where, again, this clear line of demarcation? Could an international business that is taking data and then making some inferences, would they be then subject to a private right of action? This bill just doesn't make it clear, at least to me. And so, I think the idea of having that private right of action goes beyond what those other 19 states have done. I
want to give Representative Kloba a chance to respond to that. Let me just ask you generally, where do you and your fellow Republicans come down on the idea of whether Washington should be the 20th state to have a comprehensive consumer data privacy law?
No, I totally understand the question, and thank you for it, because I think it's a great question. I do think that there are ways that we can...
and I ask because, by the way, this has been pretty bipartisan.
Oh, totally.
Across the country. You've got red states and blue states, Democrats and Republicans coming together.
I looked at that list of those 19 states, and you're absolutely right. So, yes, of course, this is something we can agree on. This is really, really important.
So is the devil in the details?
The devil's in the details.
So, Representative Kloba, let me give you a chance to respond to that question about, couldn't this just be exploited and just used to, bludgeon these companies who didn't actually mean to do something wrong?
I think, and knowing that she has two children who are lawyers, they're well aware that there are ethics rules against bringing frivolous lawsuits. So that's one protection that people have. Another protection is there's like a 5 or 6 part test within the Consumer Protection Act that you have to meet all those criteria before you're able to bring a private right. And one of the important ones is there has to have been harm. So that's a pretty high bar as far as I'm concerned. And I'm not sure what kind of protections they have in other states, but that is through case law. We have come up with that sort of, again,
and
5
you would
or 6
be
part
essentially
test.
taking that same standard that exists in our consumer protection law over to this data privacy
and
law.
for every other consumer thing, if there has been deceptive practices or fraud, we have that right now.
Well, last question about this. In your view, if it doesn't have a private right of action in it, is it something you cannot? Let me rephrase this. Is the only way you will support your bill getting across the finish line is if the PRA is intact?
There are several moving parts in this bill, so I'm not going to, never say never. I would have to see some acceptance of other things. And here's the other part. This is a bill. This is based on a model bill that has been seen in 4 or 5 different states, as well as it takes pieces from other ones.
Is this a Consumer Reports Epic
Yes, it
model?
is. Right.
With 2 advocacy groups on the consumer side that have gotten together and put forth
And it also builds on many of the rights and everything that the Washington Privacy Act, which never got passed and was the model, we've seen in the other states. So I think it's just really important to understand that these are protections that we have for every other thing, and removing them would be, I think, detrimental.
Okay, I want to go back to nuclear. You have a bill, Representative Barnard, to create a nuclear advisory commission. There's another bill to study nuclear. There is an advanced nuclear reactor projects for clean energy bill, and a increasing transmission capacity bill. Can you kind of, I don't want you to go through in detail each of these, but sort of prioritize these or help us understand what this bundle is trying to do? Is it like different approaches where if one sticks, that's great, or do you see them as working together in concert?
Sure. Well, the transmission capacity is simply, I don't think it has much to do with nuclear. It truly is just trying to, I think it's trying to
like upgrade
reconductoring. Basically, reconductoring is to take something that is more advanced, new wire, basically, and to take infrastructure that already exists and say, let's just upgrade so that we can get more power out to customers by reconductoring and something that doesn't need to be sited.
Because we can build all of the capacity, but if we can't get that capacity to people with modernized lines.
And we're trying to get that out expeditiously, correct? So we don't want to take the time to have to go through that siting process. But this doesn't necessarily have to do with nuclear. This has to do with any type of electricity. Let's just get it on the grid. So we just want to make sure that there's the power to we have 3 different companies, and we know that BPA has a list of thousands of organizations and industries that want to get power. They just can't. So we want to make sure that we get that reconductoring done so we can get more power to the grid. And that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with nuclear, but eventually I think it might. When we have a small modular reactor that needs to go and get added to the grid, this would be something that potentially could help that. But I don't even know if that's the case or if they'll need this or not. That's just a bill to help with energy.
Do you envision a day when we in this state were doing anything other than small modular, or we were doing something of a larger scale?
I think that because of the modularity of a small modular reactor, that we are going to have them being produced in a way that it's kind of order and build. If you order it, you can ship it and get one online very quickly. So I don't think that it will take over everything else. I also think that we have fusion on the way. So that's another part of the transition that I think would be the next step beyond fission. But, fission right now is part of that transformation. And we need to get something going in Washington State because this is, again, clean. I'm not going to say affordable right now, but it has the potential to be really, really affordable. And if we do want to be a cost driver as far as making energy more, making Washingtonians and Washington companies and businesses and all of the world, if we want to make energy more affordable, this is a step we need to take.
So, Rep. Kloba, what do you think about this, given that we do have this deficit, right, between what our needs are going to be and where we're going to get that power of the future? And I know a lot of people are arguing all options should be on the table. I also think that, as we've established, there are still people who feel some discomfort with nuclear because there is going to be a waste component to it. While it may burn clean, there's waste. So do you have we're putting you on the spot here, but do you have a personal opinion about this?
I do, and I want to tie the two subjects together that we've been talking about because you're tied up with a bow. One of the things that is driving our increased need for energy is data centers, which are, with the rise of AI and even just all of the data that is collected and stored and utilized, we need places to put them. And these data centers are power hungry and water hungry. And so, for instance, some of the big companies that I won't mention, but we know of them, they've made some real promises to be carbon neutral by such and such a date. Well, right now, given the projections of how they're going to be needing data centers, we've got a math problem, and it doesn't match up. They cannot get to their goal of green energy unless there's nuclear. And so we're seeing that kind of playing out around the country. Folks in Washington have some decisions to make. There certainly is fear, and that's based on, you say the word nuclear to someone and they'll either think about all of the disasters. Ordinary person could name off Fukushima, 3 Mile Island, and all of those, Chernobyl, and they were intensely destructive. So I think there needs to be.
And then we also had the whoops debacle
Yes,
in the 80s
indeed.
here, where our effort to invest in big nuclear went
Right.
belly up. So.
And those are, I was recently listening to NPR, and they were talking about other countries where that same thing has happened. So we're a little, gun shy, but rightly so. I think the task for proponents is certainly going to be to try to get over the fears of those things, prove what kind of safety measures are in place. What were the learnings in the industry based on those, so that we have a chance of those not happening again. And I think there has to be some real trade-offs between our air and greenhouse gas versus what we do with the wastes. It can be very problematic.
We have just a minute left, and we do need to get out of time, but I'm just struck that both of you are working on issues that must require a lot of explaining and education to your colleagues. You're learning a lot. Can you just very briefly each speak to kind of these are not easy topics to get. You want to just reflect for a moment on working on something like this?
Sure. Very quickly, as a mom, wanting to build a family in the Tri-Cities, I was faced with that choice a long, long time ago, over 30 years ago. And I had to dive into it. I did not want to build a family and put down roots in an area where I didn't feel safe, and I didn't feel safe to have kids and raise a family. And so I took a deep dive all on my own, just as a mom, to learn all about nuclear, to learn about, some of the things we need to be careful about, and some of the things that we didn't need to worry about. And nuclear energy was not something I needed to worry about. Now, I know we've talked about waste.
I got to stop you there.
Okay, and we'll stop there, but we can hopefully continue the conversation.
That's good. And we'll get you next time. But thank you both for being here. Appreciate the conversation, and we'll have you back. And thank you for watching Inside Olympia. We'll see you again next week.